In this third video, looking at last week's case study, we wanted to pull upon the issue of privacy that we read about in our previous case study with Anu Fateh, and how the issue of privacy comes up in this case study is in a couple of different places. And one, it resolves itself quite easily, although perhaps slightly suspectly. We see that there's concerns that happen with regards to Anu's finances. And we will recall that the power of attorney was held, and perhaps in slightly shady detail, was held by the youngest son, Douglas. And we're not really entirely sure whether or not she had the ability to understand and appreciate and to give that power of attorney, but nonetheless, he is wielding it. But we see here that Bash, who's the eldest son, goes to the financial institution and wants to talk to Ellen, the financial advisor, and he wants to see about his mother's banking. So that is a straight-on privacy question. Bash doesn't have any authority to get that information, unlike Douglas, who is either, indeed both, joint on the accounts, thus he would be able to, of course, access the financial records because being joint, he also owns those assets. And he also has the power of attorney for property document, which would allow him, if he was acting, which in this case it appears that he is, to get the records. Now remember, if you have a power of attorney that doesn't spring into effect until after an assessment of capacity has been found, then he may not be actually active yet. But if this is a continuing power of attorney or an enduring power of attorney in some jurisdictions, same thing. It starts when it's immediately created and then continues on past the point of incapacity. So it looks like this particular power of attorney that Douglas has would be an enduring one, or in Ontario you would call it a continuing one. So it's active right away and he is using it. But how does that help Bash? Well, it doesn't. What we see here is that Bash actually tries to go around that by confronting the issues of consent straight on. So we often forget that the person whose information it is already, in this case it's his mother Anu's information, she can give consent to another person to have access to the records. And you see here that there is a consent to disclose document that the financial institution gives to Bash. Now, there's a couple different problems with that. A financial institution never checks to make sure that it is in fact Anu who signed the document. Ellen never makes contact with Anu, so it really could have simply been Bash getting a scrawled signature. And it says here, Bash goes back and gets a scrawled signature that Ellen gave him and returns it to Ellen. It never says that it's actually the signature of his mother. The other person who could actually have signed that document, though clearly not in this particular case study, would be Douglas as the power of attorney. He could also, acting in the shoes of his mother, give Bash access without violating privacy, because he essentially stands in his mother's position if the power of attorney was already active. So there's some concern here that while properly given, consent can of course allow a third party to have access to information. Whether or not that actually was given in this case seems quite suspect. Has Ellen lived up to her duty of care? She has not. She really needs to ensure that it is in fact the signature of the account holder, Anu, and that it was Anu that gave the information. Further than that, it may be quite suspect that even if it was Ellen that signed it, whether she would have the ability to understand and appreciate that she's giving access to financial information, it's quite unclear at this point what what Anu's cognitive abilities are. The last piece with regards to privacy, which is deeply concerning, is the installation of a camera at Happy Hills. And we see in this particular case that there's concerns for the, quote, granny cam, and that has been installed in a newsroom without Anu knowing. Now, was there consent to install that camera by anyone? It should be Anu who gives consent because she's herself being recorded. And again, recommendation not actually having words be recorded, but simply images? Or is this being done without Anu's knowledge? If Anu herself can't understand and appreciate, it would be the power of attorney. In this case, of course, I think there's concerns that the power of attorney is the abuser. So Bash and it seems probably Clara get together and they install it. Is it legal? As we discussed last week, it falls into a bit of a gray zone, but they certainly see some concerning things. We see that Douglas is getting his mother to sign things. Now that should be raising some significant red flags, as well as yelling and acting in a threatening behavior. So it appears that the concerns that Bash and Clara have are valid. The second thing is they also catch a personal support worker shaking Anu, and that this personal support worker is intimidating her and she's being pushed away. Then we see that she is left unattended, she falls out of bed, and she's being slapped. So we see that elder abuse has been caught on film by the personal support worker. Now that would, no matter which jurisdiction you're in, fall into the category of elder abuse and neglect and need to be reported to the director of care in any nursing home across the country. In addition, depending on which jurisdiction you are, there may be other places that you can call as well. It also would provide significant evidence with Douglas, his behavior, that if they were going to challenge the appropriateness of him acting as power of attorney, they would have this evidence. Again, it's a little gray whether or not it's allowed to be recorded, but often the evidence is compelling. And that ends our little mini video looking at the privacy issues of this particular case study.